a private justice only known to them, imposed by a war coalition, and the intention is to return the judiciary to the medieval era. In the world, this tribunal is called a propaganda instrument of NATO, so there can be no question of any independence at all. We also need to add since 1996 there has been a constant communication between the NATO Secretary General and your chief prosecutor. And on 9th of May 1996, a memorandum was signed by the chief prosecutor and the supreme commander of NATO for Europe about the modalities of cooperation. Therefore, NATO and not the United Nations have taken over the role of the tribunal policeman, and that is why this tribunal cannot be considered an international institution at all, but an institution of NATO. Another factor supporting this claim, your own Article 32 of the statutes provides that expenses for the tribunal should be covered by the regular budget of the United Nations. But in practice, the money comes from very morbid sources, dark sources like the Soros foundations, different other foundations, and also from Islamic countries. The bulk of the money comes from NATO itself. According to NATO spokesman Kej, I quote, NATO is the biggest financial source for the tribunal. He stated this on the 17th of May 1999 in Brussels. We also need to recall that Soros is also funding the liberation of Army of Kosovo, the KLA, and their main propaganda newspaper, Koha Ditori.
Prilikom potpisivanja 12
During the signing on the 12th of September 1990 in Moscow, together with the foreign ministers of the Democratic Republic of Germany at the time, also France, Great Britain, the Soviet Union, the United States, of the Treaty on the Definite Order of Germany, Genscher stated, "We do not want for anything else other than to live with all other nations in freedom and democracy. State unity represents for us a greater responsibility." Very well, I will read more slowly. State unity represents for us a greater responsibility, but it does not at the same time represent our aspirations for having greater power. Chancellor Kohl on the 3rd of October, on the day of the reunification of Germany, sent a message to all the world governments, including the Yugoslav government, in which, amongst other things, he said, in future only peace will emanate from German territory. We are aware that the inviolability of borders, the respect of territorial integrity and sovereignty of all states in Europe are the basic condition for peace. And we also have moral and legal obligations which arise from German history. End of quote. Big words and big promises given to the rest of humanity, and in particular Europe, at the point when the German nation finally was allowed to remove the burden of its division, which was imposed on it precisely as a result of the darkest period of German history. Yes, this was a big promise, but at the same time an empty promise, because how did the German top leadership view the moral and legal obligations arising from German history, which they cited? And what is their relation to the inviolability of borders and respect of territorial integrity and sovereignty of all states in Europe, as they said themselves, as the main condition of peace? You could practically at the same time see very well in Yugoslavia how this was. In the territory of that state with German history, at that point of the 20th century, inflicted the cost of 3 million lives, 1,247,000 victims in First World War and 1,700,000 in World War II. Precisely in that month of German reunification, security services of the Yugoslav People's Army uncovered and managed to tape secretly activities pertaining to the illegal import of weapons by Croatia, aimed at facilitating the armed secession of Croatia. So actually, we're talking about the breakup of the territorial integrity of Yugoslavia. This import of weapons went through Hungary, but also went through some units of Germany, which made it ironical that Chancellor Kohl said in his message that only peace would emanate from German territory. The arming of the secessionists was not the only or the first kind of involvement of Germany in the breakup of Yugoslavia and in the creation of the Yugoslav crisis. The entire activities of Slovenia and Croatia in their violent achievement of independence was not only aided by Germany, but to a considerable degree was encouraged by the top state leaders. Within the efforts to prevent the conflict, or to stop the conflict in the territory of Croatia, as well as to stop attacks on the JNA, the presidency of Yugoslavia and the leaders of the Yugoslav republics gathered in Belgrade at a meeting on the 20th and the 21st of August 1991, and then adopted several decisions for the purpose of stabilizing the situation. Small program of political and economic cooperation was adopted. A commission was formed to develop agreements on the future form of the multi-ethnic states. And there was an agreement also reached between the leadership of Croatia and the officials of the JNA. On the 20th of August, there was an extraordinary ministerial session in which the foreign ministers of European Community member states concluded that they welcomed the readiness of all parties to embark on negotiations about the future of Yugoslavia and requested all the sides to conduct the negotiations in goodwill amongst themselves. On that very same day, Genscher held a consultative meeting with the foreign ministers of Slovenia and Croatia. On the 24th of August 1991, he called Boris Frlec, the Yugoslav ambassador to Bonn, who happened to be a Slovene, which was a guarantee that the message directed to the Yugoslav authorities would also be forwarded to Ljubljana and Zagreb, and told him, if the bloodshed continues and if the policy of violence with the support of the JNA is not stopped immediately, the federal government will seriously have to consider the recognition of Slovenia and Croatia within the existing borders. It will also conduct the review on these matters within the European community.
The question is the following. Was more impetus needed, was a greater impetus needed to those who had already proclaimed secession and who had already resorted to weapons in order to carry this through? Was a greater impetus needed in order to violate the ceasefire? Was any greater impetus needed than this message that continued bloodshed will lead to the recognition of those states? Unfortunately, that's what happened. The message did yield the desired effect.